with placemakers, and we put this together. And the reason being is that tonight is kind of, personally for me, kind of the culmination of two really serendipitous events in my life. 10 years ago, when I became a partner at Placemakers, was when I had the opportunity to meet Steve, who has since gone on to just do some really incredible things in redefining the sustainability conversation in America and trying to reconnect with the wisdom that's inherent in the traditions that built the world we know at a time before the thermostat, at a time where sustainability was not a buzzword that you either bought into or didn't, but was a reality of life that you bought into or you perished. So there's a lot of wisdom there, and Steve has done remarkable things with the original green in doing that. So jump ahead 8 years from that point, and here I am in my hometown of Decatur, Georgia, and starting to have all these mutual friends who are telling me about this guy, Clay Chapman. You know, I tend to have a job that a lot of people I know don't really understand what I do for a living. And so they said, you know, you seem to be involved in that kind of thing, and there's this guy who's building these really remarkable houses out of brick and just doing structural masonry and traditional construction technique, and you really have to meet this guy. So I finally met Clay, and we've become good friends, but in the course of our conversation, at the time Clay was really building what are kind of custom homes, vanity homes for affluent people, and doing gorgeous work. But the more I talked to him, the more I realized that his goal was to try to find a way to make structural masonry become a normative practice in home building. You know, something that could scale and actually become a real viable alternative that was affordable to people of average means. So that was at the time where I was amazed by the fact that he had come into all this through his own channels, and the entire world of new urbanism and all of the people, many of which had spent many years searching for a guy exactly like him, didn't know anything about him. So I decided to make it my personal mission to connect him with all of you folks, and so that's what I've been doing for the past 2 years, and this session is the culmination of that, where I finally brought Steve and Clay together to do a session for CMUers. So to kick things off and give the big picture perspective, which we will then whittle down to the small picture at the level of a single building, Steve Mouzon.
I'm going to attempt to do something that I've never even tried before, and that is 5 slides a minute. So this is going to be an absolute information. At the bottom of each slide after this one, you'll see originalgreen.org. If you're interested in what I'm talking about, just write that down, because you can't possibly remember everything I'm going to say in the next 20 minutes here. What is Original Green? Well, it's the sustainability that kept humans alive for almost all of human history until the thermostat age. It's also...
Move over to there.
Oh, sorry.
We like your pictures.
Yeah. It's also a system of aggregating, curating, and distributing the wisdom of sustainability broadly, and here's how it works. It begins with the proposition that you must first of all build sustainable places before it makes any sense to talk about green buildings within them. Those places must first of all be nourishable, then accessible, serviceable, and securable. Then those buildings must be lovable, durable, adaptable, and frugal. Oh, what's it? I'm going further. Oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. Now, I'm going to spend most of my time, almost all of my time, talking about the sustainable buildings, because we're going to lead on into the practice of building. And so I'll only mention the place-based parts, but they actually have equal standing. Okay, so I don't want you to understand that, or don't want you to think that it's unequal because of how much time I spend talking about buildings. A nourishable place is one where you can look out onto the fields and onto the waters from which most of your food comes. Now, when I first started talking about this years ago, people said, Steve, you're an idiot. I can eat whatever I want, wherever I want. In more recent times, it's delightful to see that people have realized that local food is a good thing. An accessible place is one where you can gain access to the place by a variety of means of access, especially including the self-propelled ways of walking and biking, because it doesn't matter what the price of gas goes to. If you're living in an accessible place, you'll always be able to get around. A serviceable place is one where you can get the basic services of life within walking distance in your neighborhood, and the people serving you those services can afford to live nearby as well. A securable place is one where at those inevitably less secure times in every city's future, you can secure the most vulnerable parts of the urbanism, like the middle of the block, and leave the streets open for everyone to travel up and down. If a building cannot be loved, it will not last. Doesn't matter what the carbon footprint of the building is once its pieces have been carted off of the landfill. If it is lovable, then it needs to be durable enough to carry that lovability along into an uncertain future. If lovable and durable, it needs to be adaptable enough to be used for many things. This building started out as a savings and loan. It's now a Banana Republic, but as you can see from the holes on the wall, from other signs, it's been other things in between. If lovable, durable, and adaptable, then it needs to be frugal, because there's nothing worse than a lovable, durable, adaptable energy hog, because people will join arms in front of the bulldozer and say, oh, no, you don't. You know, they won't let you tear them down. So it has to be all of the above. So let's go back to the lovable. People say, lovable, that's such a cheesy kind of consumer-grade word. What's up with that? Well, let me tell you what's up with that. Matter of fact, a lot of my classicist colleagues will plead for a higher standard of beauty. They say, no, that's more precise, it's more professional. Sounds like we know what we're doing. Well, here's the deal. Here's why I say that. If you look at this picture of Wanda, or there she is sitting there, either one, what you don't know from that picture is that we have shared love about as equally as any two humans do for over a third of a century now. But what's exceptionally obvious from looking at the picture is that we do not share beauty equally. Okay? Had it been up to beauty, I would have never had a chance with her. But because love did for me what beauty could not do, we're still together after almost 34 years. Now, let's talk a little more about beauty. Like this unnamed stranger on a balcony down in Cuba a couple of years ago. Had no idea who she was. She just smiled. I took a picture. She gave me a thumbs up, so I guess it's okay to use the picture. But like her, beauty can be warm and engaging at times. And, whoa. What did I hit? I hit the wrong button. Okay, here we go. But beauty can also be sad and hard and even a little bit cold. This is Sally and my youngest daughter. But anyhow, beauty will move us to admiration, but love moves us to action. So because love takes us further than beauty can, it's actually a broader standard, and so that's why I use that instead. There's three sources of lovability: things that reflect us and that delight us and put us in harmony with the world around us. The things that reflect us can reflect everything from the scale of the human form all the way out to the culture of our nation. I'm just going to talk about the human form tonight. This, the most famous drawing in all of human history, illustrates certain aspects of the proportions of the overall human body. Now, we've been used to seeing this guy sitting here totally naked for 500 years. We put him on T-shirts and coffee mugs and all that. But just as soon as I use his image to try to illustrate another point, it really looks kind of crude. Because at this point, it's like, dude, put your clothes on. He's a flasher, you know. But what the point here is that also some elements of buildings should reflect the proportion of certain parts of the human body, like the human face. A window pane should be vertical, because that's what you look out the window with, is your face. Nobody in the room has a horizontal face. We all have vertical faces. Also, a door should reflect the standing vertical proportion of the human body. We don't lay down on the floor and roll through the door, you know. Also, the human body is arranged horizontally in a certain way. Unless you're, we can take all sorts of poses with our limbs, but unless you're horribly disfigured in some accident at your face, you will always be bilaterally symmetrical, like traditional buildings and all traditions have been. Now, also vertically arranged, the human body has a certain arrangement. We have a head, and we have a body, and we have a base or feet. And just like that, all of the classical orders, like in this case you have the entablature, the column, and the pedestal. The pedestal has that same three-part division. Then, of course, you have the capital and the shaft and the base. Within the entablature, you have the cornice and the frieze and the architrave. And so, anyhow, that's how it can reflect the human body. Now, there's also things that can delight us, and there's a number of different delights that we can talk about here. First is sensual delight, just the basic senses of warmth or cooling or sounds or sights. Then there's what I call group delight. Now, there's The earliest form of group delight was places to worship. There's other places now, such as places that people gather to celebrate the home team if they win. There's places of political assembly. There's also places of social assembly. You see, this place isn't giving the delight so much as it is creating a place for the people together and they enjoy each other. Intellectual delight is something that architects are really good at giving to themselves, okay? But not to anybody else. We need to, and this is the only kind of delight that architects today normally focus on, is just intellectual delight. And so that's a real problem. There's what I call sheltering delight, and that's kind of like an embracing spaces. They kind of want to protect you from the world. That's kind of like more of a maternal sort of thing. And then there's also challenging delight, which is more of a paternal thing, like when your dad kind of kicks you out of the house and said, go get a job, and it's like points of embarkation, or where you can climb high up and see a distant view. And then there's also the bracing places, like this kind of scary bar in New Orleans is kind of the opposite of that. And then there's things that put us in harmony with the world around us, and there's several different types of harmony here as well. We all understand mathematical harmony, or we think we do anyway. Now, I will say this. Now this is the most famous diagram, of course, of the golden mean. Now, but when I was at school, way back in the late 70s, early 80s, the professors all said that the ancients had some system of proportional harmony, but they never told us what those systems were. Imagine how disturbed I was a few years later to find out that some of those harmonies were simple proportions like 1 to 1 or 2 to 1 or 3 to 2 or 4 to 3. Matter of fact, like the fifth note in music is a proportion to 3 to 2. The fourth note, like D over C, is 4 to 3. Now, what we found since then, we said, you know what, we can do this in a plan. For example, it's not that hard to make the principal rooms, like the living room here is a 4 to 3, as is the dining room. The kitchen is a 3 to 2, breakfast is 1 to 1, master bedroom 3 to 4. The problem is in the third dimension, because as long as you deal with pre-cut studs or concrete blocks, it's not so easy to make those well proportioned. Then there's harmony with natural processes. Here, the one thing I want to say about this is that the operating system of the original green is something that I call a living tradition, and it mimics the process of life itself. Now, it is not life itself. It gives honor to the process of life, but it isn't life itself. But it's the closest thing that humans can create to that. There's also harmony with natural laws, and primarily two of them. The law of gravity. It's not good enough to make something stand up. It also needs to look like it's able to stand up as well. Then there's the laws of thermodynamics. 100 years from now, our descendants of everything that we do today, the one thing that they will say, what were they doing about is cladding buildings all in glass all the way around, because the smartest glass in the world right now is not as good as a plain old 2x4 stud wall or 11 insulation, the cheapest possible finishes. Then there's harmony with natural forms. Architects once had no compunction at all about adorning their buildings with all sorts of human forms and animal forms and plant forms. Today, of course, you would be laughed out of the room if you proposed that. If the room was filled with architects. If it's filled with regular people, then they travel thousands of miles to see this building. That's the Louvre. Then there's the most mysterious one that I don't really understand very well yet. It's something I call harmony with the region. And let me just illustrate it this way. If you live in Beaufort, let's say, these buildings are well adapted to regional climates and climate and condition and culture there. But a person from Beaufort could actually go to Pienza that they've never been to before, thousands of miles away, and say, wow, we love this too. How is that possible that someone can go far away and love something that they've never experienced before? I think it's actually a kind of a survival mechanism within us, because for most of human history, if wherever you took shelter in an unknown place, had a great deal to do with whether you survived until the morning. Okay, so I think we have a very innate sense of what is appropriate to a place that actually makes us say, well, hey, wow, I've never been here before, but this looks so right for here. Now, what we do today, unfortunately, in the new urbanism and elsewhere, and we need to get better than this, but we say, well, okay, you like that, well, let's do them both together, and it looks ridiculous. So, let's talk about new urban buildings. There's a few principles here that I want to get into. The number one thing is that, well, not number one, but I mean, these are in no particular order, but the first thing is that what we build must be repairable and patchable. Okay, on this side, people talk about no maintenance all the time. When they say no maintenance, it really means maintenance proof. You can't maintain it, okay? Because when a piece of vinyl siding tears off, what do? Well, you either have a hideous mismatch, because what's stored up over the garage won't match this after several years. So you either have to have a bad mismatch or tear it all off and cart it all off to the landfill. Over here, this building was built with masonry, which is inherently repairable and patchable. And so what happens, over the years, this opening was once here, as you can see from the arch. Okay, over the years, over the centuries, the needs changed and it moved to here. They fixed it, they stuck on it. Even after this falls off, that is still a very charming thing. Okay, so but in Vegas, they pay people millions of dollars to make stuff look like this. Why not just build in a patchable and repairable way and let nature take its course? It'd be a far better thing. Also, how do you attach to the shell? One of the worst ways, but the best way of attaching is to a masonry shell, because as long as you have somebody that's even halfway good at patching, if this is a brick wall and you have a stud wall that goes into that, or a cabinet or whatever, and you take it off 20 years from now, you can easily patch that and you'd never know that it happened. The worst thing is a glass curtain wall. First of all, you can only attach it where the moles run all the way through, and then what happens after you pull that out? You got all the screw holes, and so in a very few years it looks terrible. People say, don't build with masonry because of the Portland cement we use to make the mortar. That's a big carbon impact. But let me ask you this: how soon do you think this building will be torn down versus a vinyl house? Okay, if the building lasts for centuries longer, then you're stretching the impact of all that carbon. And by the way, you don't necessarily have to build with Portland cement mortar. Think about how buildings age. This building has obviously been there for centuries, but it still looks really good. But the best standard is, what will your buildings look like as ruins? Think about mold and mildew. There's several things here. I'm only going to talk about one of them, and that is the concealed spaces. One thing we started doing recently is actually carving into walls. You see, that wall is bordered on the one side. We have shelves here, and it's open on the other side, so every interior wall becomes a storage unit, a shelving unit. You can carve into roofs as well. That's the attic up there. Because when you insulate the roof line, then this is just the attic floorboard. It's not like you need this space for insulation. You can carve into ceilings as well. This is between the first and the second floor. Also carving into porch ceilings. And then you have all these places that were prime places for mold and mildew to develop that actually don't anymore. Just a couple of things about rot and rust. First of all, this bridge, which had only been there about 10 years when I took the picture, was very strong at the beginning, but obviously was not now. This is seawater, there's big waves, and of course what's happened is all the rebar rusted and the bridge is falling apart. So we very often confuse strength with durability. They're not the same thing. It's really a very different thing. Several years ago in Birmingham, Alabama, went into an office building. 3 walls were glass in the lobby, 1 wall was wood. I said, how did I get to the rest of the building? I said, oh, wait a minute. Those are hinges. That's the door handle. And matter of fact, everybody else had the same problem. So they have this sign here that says elevator and an arrow pointing that way. And then over here, on the other hand, everybody knows that with the double hung window, you drop the top sash, raise the bottom sash. Then in the cool of the day, in the early evening, the hot air will go out, the cool air will come in, and it naturally ventilates without a breeze. Now, I'll suggest to you that the durability of a building component is inversely proportional to the thickness of the manual. Okay? If you don't have to tell somebody, there's no question that'll be around until something, kid throws a ball through it or whatever. But over here, if you have to tell somebody, that's a really bad thing. Think about also the margin of error. Somebody forgot to paint this steel lintel for just a few years ago, and now it's all rusted. So it doesn't take, with steel, it doesn't take but just a few microns until you don't have the structural strength that you need. Now let's talk about the adaptable buildings. The first thing about adaptability, this seems strange, is proximity to the street. Okay? If a building, let's take an extreme. If a building is 5 miles off the street, about all it can be is a very wealthy person's estate home or the explosives factory that when it blows up, it only kills the employees, not all the townspeople. But the closer it gets to the street, the more things it can be used for. The ceiling height needs to be very appropriate to the region. I've seen buildings torn down because the ceiling height was too low when they're built in the deep south, and people don't tolerate that because it's so hot. The simpler the massing is, the more things it can be used for. These are used in London that once the horse was down here and the groom was up here. Now that's the horse and groom pub, and then there's a deli right down here, as you can see, so they can be used for many things. Also the simplicity of the circulation. When I was in architecture school, the first question they would always ask at a desk crit is, tell me about your circulation. And that didn't mean cardiopulmonary or whatever. They were talking about, here's the thing. I think that architects have what I call freeway envy. We're more concerned about moving 3 seconds or 8 seconds through a space than we are a space that we might inhabit for 2-3 hours at a time. And so we try to celebrate the circulation. You see this building here where they pulled the stairs out where you can see them. That's not good enough. They made this a mirrored wall so you can see them all over again. And then, of course, here's the elevator over here as well. And so, it makes you want to say, oh, gee, but this is kind of like architectural flashing, and I'm not talking about the kind on the roof. It's like, man, put that stuff back in the building, Don't need to see that. Also, we have a long history of increasing proportions of pipes. By pipes, I mean services that we route through the building. I've had people that have literally come to me in a previous career in the Deep South and said, this building was built before air conditioning. We want you to tear it down and build another one for us. I said, look, you don't want to say that? We can say in the building. Say, no, we don't want to do that. I said, well, I'm not the architect for you in that case. But literally we need to be thinking about how do you get services through a building that haven't even been invented yet. Now let's talk about frugality. One big thing on frugality is a really major point, and that is that almost all discussion about sustainability today is all about something I call gizmo green, which is the proposition that with better equipment and better material, we can achieve sustainability. Now, that's a part of the story, but it's only a very small part. So I want to talk about a number of game changers of how we actually become more frugal. For all of the thermostat age, basically what we've done is we said, let's design a box. Doesn't matter what style you wrap around it, but you call in the engineers. They size the loads, they size the equipment, hang these things on the wall, and there you go. Now, look over here on this side. Do you see any of these people? I think that's Buff Chase, actually. But do you see any of these people here that are suffering? Okay, nobody's suffering there, right? What they're doing, though, is they're sitting out on the streets of Paris having an espresso or whatever, but whether they realize it or not, they are also conditioning themselves for the local environment so that when they return back indoors, that they may not actually need to cut the equipment off for several months of the year. And when you discover that, then you have to think and you say, well, what's the most efficient equipment? Is obviously that which is off. Okay, you can't get and so the key is to entice people out into a great public realm of streets, plazas, squares, greens, parks, and playgrounds. Where they can actually get conditioned. Now, this is something the Neurobusiness should absolutely own. Who else creates great public realms? I mean, that's us. Okay, so that's the #1 key to sustainability is conditioning the people. That's far more efficient than having better equipment. And then you also want to entice people out into the great private realm of courtyards and gardens around the buildings. This leads to a condition that I call living in season, where you can throw the windows open for most of the year. Obviously not the hottest days and the coldest days, but the days in between. Building smaller and smarter is a hugely important thing. What we've done since World War II is basically double the size of the houses and half the size of the families. Now what's happened though is even though we're living in 4 times as much house per person, what we're doing is we've actually bought so much stuff that we have made the mini storage industry a $17 billion a year business. Y'all, that's bigger than the movie industry. I mean, this is serious stuff. So we're seriously hit on consumption. Here's a few things we can do about it. Think about going to a restaurant. What's the first tables to fill up? It's always the booths, right? Okay, so why don't we give people what they don't really want? It's 6 times the size. You can seat 6 people comfortably in a 36 square foot booth. In a dining room with a buffet, that's more like 180 square feet, 5 times as big. Why do you want to do that? Here's another idea, an insulating bed alcove. Where by day it looks like this, by night it looks like this. If the curtains are thick enough, then what happens is you can literally cut the thermostat almost completely off on a winter night, and your body heat alone will keep you warm within there. The outdoor living rooms, I mentioned this briefly before, but if you build these great outdoor living rooms to entice people outdoors, then what happens is that these rooms will normally cost about 1/5 of what space will inside. Okay? Now, if you entice them outdoors, and you actually need somewhat less interior space as a result, because this is serious living space for most of the year, then actually these are free. Okay? So if they need 20% less, and if this is 20% the cost of that, then that's free. Why not store stuff under the bed? Why not even store stuff in the bed? You know, and it doesn't have to be like this. It could be shelves, drawers that go under. We're starting to now always board the walls. Matter of fact, at Studio Sky, we don't even put sheetrock on the walls anymore. What we'll do is we'll board one side of the walls, and then what we'll do on the interior walls, that side's boarded, and so every interior wall becomes a shelving unit. You know, the exterior walls in most climates still have to be insulated, but not the interiors. The light wings, the idea here is if you build narrow wings, like in this house, the one that I did, that actually had no mechanical condition for over 2 years that we lived there until a really, really bad freeze that froze everybody's pipes, including ours, but everybody else had regular HVAC. I finally said, well, we need a backup system for those worst days of the year, and so I cobbled together, this is back in the 1980s, I cobbled together, kind of built my own geothermal system to heat into that. But what happens is when you have thin wings, or light wings, then both daylighting and cross ventilation is just completely a no-brainer. Like food, if you have highly processed materials, they're probably not so good for you. Aluminum takes something like 500,000 BTUs to create 1 pound of it, whereas less processed materials are not energy-free, but they're generally better for you. We talk a lot about recycling, and recycling is good, but reuse is a whole lot better. You know, if you recycle, you have to take it apart and take the pieces off and use some of the pieces somewhere else. But if you reuse, you just simply use it in place. We have a lot of conventions about how to do an interior. Matter of fact, this is Scott's guest bedroom that I slept in 2-3 years ago. First time I met Clay. I've always been told, the night before at the lecture, I've always been told that you can't have a window on the bed wall. Well, let me tell you something. All of my life, the most delightful bedrooms I've ever woke up in are the ones where the morning light is streaming in right across the pillow. What also happens if you get light on 2 or 3 walls, then you can actually build rooms incredibly small. Eric Moser designed a bedroom in Haversham recently. It was 8 feet by 9 feet, but had windows on 3 walls. The kids were fighting over who got to sleep in it. Had it had only 1 window, they would have been saying, "What are you doing? Make me sleep in the closet?" You know? And so it really is a different thing. So really the bottom line is what we're trying to do is put our buildings back to work again for the first time in 100 years. You know, our buildings have been unemployed for 100 years. It's the machines that's done all the work. You know, and what happens when you do that you actually notice, check this out. Okay, this is a light modulation device. This is an air modulation device. Some of those items that actually were the control devices were some of the most, okay, now, in polite company, you worry about people dropping the F-bomb, right? Okay, I'm about to drop the C-bomb. Okay, this is something that architects absolutely cannot tolerate, but everybody else has no problem with. The word is charm, or charming. You know, with architects, that's an insult. With everybody else, they know exactly what you mean. So some of these devices actually were some of the most charming parts about the buildings. So the whole idea is to be frugal naturally first and then bridge the gap on the worst times of the year with equipment that is more efficient, but that you don't have to use that often. Bottom line is this, and that is that Gizmo Green is a part of the solution. It's a small part of frugality. But the problem is almost all national discussions about green building are all about Gizmo Green, nothing else. Okay, so they're missing the whole big picture of what sustainability is really all about. Thank y'all so much.
For anybody who's not panting, we're going to move on. I don't want to steal Clay's thunder by saying everything that he's going to say, but he is Clay. As part of his efforts to move towards a way to make near permanent structures affordable to a middle-class audience, he stumbled into a job that gave him the opportunity to test out the model, where somebody hired him to build a house, which gave him the opportunity to test all these theories that he's been playing with and see if he can hit a particular price point that he's been shooting for. And a part of the effort that he's been doing is included the filming of a documentary that is called Hope for Architecture. And he's going to start off by running just a 3 or 4 minute teaser reel of the footage that's been coming together. And then after that, we'll have Clay Chapman.
like stolen by hands that are no longer hands. This love that forever will stand where I stand, like a sky full of birds so desperate to fly. Fly for your flying, days fly by. River rolling down to the sea, roll it alone like she wrote to me. We're on the road that rolled me away. Roll me back home to her arms one day. Back to the table where the children ran along. The dog by the door, my dad's gone. Look in her eyes and she looks in mine. It's like the morning sun shining on and on, shining on and on.
That was the last break, by the way. That wasn't every day that we would do so a lot of people are... Thank you. A lot of folks are wondering what my background is. I get a lot of questions. I don't have any kind of formal architectural training, but I do think it's important that you understand what it is that's informing this. So I believe that I have a fine arts background, and I did have some vocational drafting in high school, but primarily what I'm doing is influenced by fine arts. So I'm going to push through a few art slides, and then I'm going to show you 6 buildings that will be in a chronological order and talk to you a little bit about those. I'll show you the finished building, an interior shot, and a construction shot for 6 buildings. So this is an oil. My wife and her sister. Just going to push through these pretty quickly to give you a sense of my aesthetic. A lot of the same principles that we were taught in painting and sculpting was composition and balance, texture, color, light, shadow. Okay, thanks. And so that stuff translates very easily from I just start thinking about building as a larger form of sculpture that you happen to live in. So yeah, just push through this pretty quickly. And then you can start to see this was a hallmark or a horse stable that I had done. It's a lost wax bronze casting, and I used that in a couple other buildings as a marker. Go ahead. And this is wedding bands and engagement ring, sort of a macro and micro approach to as far as scale goes. And then you can, here we were doing a really wonderful horse stable, couldn't find a nice weather vane for it, so we just ended up making our own weather vane. And there's another example of the hallmark and how the fine arts have kind of come into play and been very informing in what I've been doing with the building. I got started building horse stables. That's the way I got myself through school. This was the last carpentry-based building that I had done. Next.
By who designed it?
I designed everything I'm going to show you is from my own designs and expression. And for the most part, I physically have done most of the work on a lot of the stuff. So here's an interior shot, and just to give you some insight of what led me into masonry, it was 1,200-pound horses that would chew a building down if it was made of wood. So you would put all this effort into creating such a wonderful building and come back a few years later, man, you know, they're just powerful, heat producing, moisture producing. Horses and wood just do not mix that well, except on a very utilitarian basis. So there's an example of it in frame. For scale, this is a 3/4 ton Ford pickup. So this cupola here is, from the ridge to the top, is about 10 foot 1 inch, as I recall. 4 people can stand in that. So it looks kind of quaint and small, but it's actually a pretty big horse stable. So I went from that. This is my next project. These are all sequential as far as my large projects go. I've had smaller things going on in between, but so I went from that carpentry building to doing my first structural masonry and timber frame building in West Tennessee. That first one was in Greenville, North Carolina, out close to the Outer Banks. So this is in West Tennessee, about an hour east of Memphis, and it's a triple wide structural clay brick masonry wall construction. Slate roof, timber frame. This cast stone, we cast all of the stone on site ourselves. This is I think it's an 18,000-pound window unit that we made on site there. So I was a lot younger then. Go back. For a second. Start. These cornices are all in 2-foot segments, and because they were so small and we were casting them in the summer, they were drying too quickly. And so we went into the building and dammed up one of the stalls and filled the stalls with water, and would submerge these for a month at a time. I don't know if I ever told you that story. So it was nuts. All right, let's go to the next one. Here's an interior shot of that building. And this is our first. This was my first timber frame, and we had gotten this building up to about this point here with the structural masonry. Here's some cast stone windows just standing in the background. And I went to my client, and even then I would listen to the building, and the building was just screaming for a timber frame roof system. It's not what we planned on. I talked my client into doing it. He said, do it. I said, I don't know how. And hopped on a plane up to Massachusetts for a 5-day workshop, came back, spent 5 months with my head down building that. And that was when, at this workshop in Mass, was when I met my Australian friends that I was telling you about. Right. And so my Australian friends that I met at this workshop, we became fast friends. I said, hey, why don't you guys come down to Tennessee? They're traveling the world, right? Come down to Tennessee and help me with my first timber frame. They thought about it, called me a couple of weeks later, said, okay, we can give you 8 weeks. So they came down and left 18 months later. All right, so I went from that to my first house, and the way that I got into this, someone finally came along and said, we want you to build us a house like that. And so this is in Rome, Georgia, and it's a triple wide masonry construction as well, a lot of timber framing, and it took more than 2 years to build. I brought 2 apprentice masons with me from Tennessee. When they arrived on the job site, they never laid a brick. By the time we were finished, they could do about 90% of what I could do. So that's the sort of education that we're wanting to pursue. There's been a lot of talk about internships and working with some of these artisan-based schools. Interior shot of Pierce Lee House. This house also won a National Brick and Architectural Award Best in Class, so we were really happy with that. And I love this picture here. I went from that, I was on the job for 2.5 years, and I thought, gosh, I've got to figure out a way to build a little bit faster and make some profit. So I came up with this sort of hybrid, and we've got structural masonry on the front for the exterior porch there, and then we just conventionally built the rest of the house. But yeah, I won't do that.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, please.
Tell about the wood on your porch barn, your timber frame. Where you got it?
Well, that we cut it off, and we spent a couple of months cutting it before we got there.
Might build all of that wood,
Yeah.
put it all together, and brought it from Tennessee.
Yeah, we were in the middle of milling the wood when I first found out about 9/11. I remember that. So that was fall of 2001. And we spent a couple of months doing that, and hauled it over in 3 freight trucks and started building. So. And I don't have a construction picture of this house, because when you're conventionally building something, it's just not something you want to see. And maybe there's something to be noticed about that. I don't know. I do enjoy that when I'm dealing with structural masonry, at no point is it not worthy of a photograph. So, but that ingle neck was a nice turn. So then I went to the Dalton house and did another hybrid job. These are this is a structural masonry porch. There's one on the back as well. We built these first before we did any framing, and so it had the appearance of the ruins, and it worked out really nicely. This also was a National Brick and Architecture gold for single family brick.
The weight of that slate roof.
Yeah, these I was inspired by Rhodes College in Memphis for this slate, and it's these pieces at the bottom are 2 inches thick, 24 by 24 inches. It's a graduated, diminished slate roof that we put a lot of time into, and it's extremely heavy. There's tons and tons involved with that. And I did add a shot in this one because I like the back of the house so much. There's some nice things going on there. This is a bridge that we had to build for the driveway because of this huge live oak, and the ordinances there was shared with the property next to us, and we had to figure out a creative way to get the vehicles back to the detached garage. And that's one of the reasons that we got the lot, because no one else could figure out a way to make that work. So, and this is some interior shots of that. Go back one.
Yeah.
Sorry. And so I really want you to kind of pay attention to the level of detail at this point, and what we are drawing back from in order to do what we're doing now, and what is informing what we're doing now. We're not maxing ourselves out to do the Hope Architecture field test. We're actually having to restrain ourselves quite a bit, and really not enough to accomplish what we will eventually accomplish with it for the next one. And this is that structural masonry porch is built ahead of time. Of course, they're built before the framing because they will support framing members as that structure is being created. Back up. All right. So it was from here that I really needed to build a studio space for myself, just to work in. Our house is small. We have our 3rd child, and so I'd been salvaging some bricks, salvaging some mortar from various jobs, and so from the Dalton house, I went to building this, and this is my little garden studio in my backyard, and this was the inspiration for what we're doing now. There wasn't a drawing. There was, I just got out and started laying brick. We poured some footings, obviously, and started laying some brick. And there were half a dozen different kinds of brick. There were 4 different color mortars, and we just, you know, I pretty much laid all of that by myself. I got some help towards the end, but when I finished, I kind of stepped back from that and thought, how many of my friends wouldn't want to live in a house built that way? And because I know I would, you know, and I looked at it, and then I calculated how much would it cost me to build this if I hadn't salvaged everything. If I was going out and having to pony up for all the materials and everything, and I was really surprised at what came of that, and that ultimately inspired what we are doing now. So a lot of this stuff is going to be obvious for you guys, but it's stuff I felt like we needed to just touch on very quickly. There's a lot of inherent problems with production building, and there's obviously a lot of rewards with permanent construction. And that's really my motivation, this guy right here. So we want to make the world a better place. You know, we can do that by making much better choices than what we are currently making. All right. So as I started considering that stuff and trying to turn that into a reality, I was working hard to make sense of it and identified what I felt like was the market for what I was trying to do. And I was, because I am in that market myself, I'm part of the upper middle class. I had some good insight as to what that market wants, and these were some notes that I made to myself that helped reassure me that I was going in the right direction. Of course, all along I'm polling my friends and I'm talking to people and I'm getting as much feedback as I can as I'm moving through this. So this was an ad that I found in Wall Street Journal magazine, Patagonia ad. This kind of says it all, you know. And down here in the small copy, they have all of the statistics for what it was required environmentally to create that jacket. And it's that kind of accountability that we're moving towards. And if businesses are not starting to ramp up towards that, we're going to be missing the boat, because the market is getting smarter and their value system is changing. Okay. And this is probably the most important thing that people want to know about. It always comes down to cost. How can we possibly build a structural masonry house and it be affordable? And I'm going to give you some numbers in a little while to explain that. First of all, when we're wanting to create permanence in architecture, we need to have some sort of historical proof. You can't come up with a new product and say it's going to last 1,000 years necessarily, because you just don't know yet. And we certainly have examples of that. And it doesn't mean that we necessarily have to pursue that in a replicating sort of way. We can use traditional materials, traditional techniques, and use them in fresh ways that are relevant to our time. It's silly for us to ignore 2,000 years of progress in what shelter is about. So that's the sort of historical proof rather than precedence. Develop concise rule of thumb unit. I kind of distilled this down to looking at the clay brick masonry wall into cubic foot units, and came up with a strong, accurate calculation of what that would cost. That way, you know, we can determine how many cubic feet are in a building like this very quickly, because the wall itself is 12 inches thick. So, and I'll get into the cost of that in the next slide and show you some examples. So, just really simply there, I've looked at what it takes to lay one brick turnkey, and give ourselves a small contingency with that, and we are pretty much on the mark with that, with what we've done with the book. This is something interesting here. 22 by 22 foot by 10 foot tall building. That's 400 square feet, and we can all kind of conceptualize what a 20-foot by 20-foot building would be. $13,440. That just seems like a very modest amount for what you're getting when you think about that building. But then look at what exponentially happens when you go to a 22 by 42 foot building. You go from a $33 a foot price point to a $24 price point. So there's some exponential things happening that you have to think about that when you're designing these structures. Simplicity is critical. And we were in Charleston, my wife and I and kids, and we happened upon these 3 buildings that were being remodeled a little bit. And I was taken by how very, very simple these structures were. They were built in the 1730s, and they have almost a factory quality to them. They're boxes. But there's something I've come to realize is I would rather live in an honest box than that other thing that they're building. So then something really magical happened. All right, you can see the guy's ladder right here, and I'm talking to him, and one of these gates is open. And of course, I got permission before I slipped in there. Why? And again, look at this building is all the way up to the sidewalk. There's just something so incredibly austere, and I really want you to take that in before we go to the next slide. Go ahead. And then you step into this sort of wonderland where the spaces between the buildings are just generating this wonderful energy. And that's something that I've never had the opportunity to do, put my buildings side by side. And I'm really looking forward to doing that. So yeah, it was just really a wonderful little oasis right there. And another look after seeing all that, just how simple it is. Okay. All right, here's our completed structural masonry envelope for the field test, and we've got $71,000 in that. This is a 3,000 square foot house. It's about a 1,000 square foot footprint. I refer to it as a big small house. It's a full cellar, main level, second level. I was really expecting more people. I guess in the Q&A they're going to hammer me out on the cost. I don't know. But to give you an example also, I talked some about false constructs and untested assumptions. And this will be something that you'll be able to wrap your head around pretty quickly. There's 54 windows in the house, and we've spanned all of them with granite lintels, 8 by 12. Remember, the wall's 12 inches deep, so that with granite lintels are 12 inches deep, 8 inches tall. The entire granite package delivered was less than $3,000. That was not a salvage deal. That was freshly quarried granite from Elberton, Georgia, about less than 200 miles away. Roughly $1 an inch, $1 a running inch for an 8 by 12 cross section. I love that you showed the metal lintel that was deteriorating, and because obviously we were just pursuing it, looking at everything when we were trying to get to our price point. And we would have had to use 3 of those lintels to do what this one piece of granite would cost. And so the conventional metal lintels that you showed would cost twice what the granite cost, would be a maintenance issue within 20 years, and don't come close to delivering the aesthetic of the stone. So half the cost. And you don't see stuff like that because nobody builds with walls that can hold it up. They're really heavy. So, it's amazing the opportunities that come about because it goes well. And this is showing the house a little more finished. We put the slate roof on it for $15,700. That was a bit of an overstock deal, but I did get a commitment that we would be able to put that slate roof on for $20,000. And the reason for that is, you'll notice the shed roof dormer, there's no valley here. You start adding gables and valleys and stuff into a roof, it gets very complex when you're a slater. So you just keep it as simple as possible. And that's about all I have for you. Clap again. I did want to mention this. As far as our price point, we were targeting. We were. Go to the next slide real quick. There. I'm sorry. Back up. I'm sorry. Anyway, we were shooting for a really simple type of construction that's extremely affordable. We've ended up nailing the upper middle class. We can build this house for the same price as Party Point 4 squares are being built in the city in built buildings with that $150 a foot price point. But it ended up being much grander than we ever expected it to be. This is a Williamsburg home. Look how wonderful this is. And it's just so difficult to know, when you're experimenting with this and you're used to doing the sort of things that we're doing. Go to the next slide. When you're used to doing this and you enjoy doing that, it's really difficult, go to the next slide, to come back and do this, And so somewhere in between these two buildings is where there's a lot of leeway and a lot of room to take this concept further. We can get this to an $80 square foot price point. I know that we can do that. Just with the granite and with the slate, just simplifying the design further. And but that's going to be more of a middle class house. And again, just a reminder of what we initially started with. So that's it this time.
At the time we thought this up, I thought we were going to have a little bit more opportunity to have a moderated discussion because I thought we'd have a panel, but it's a lot more informal. So I really don't want to get in the way of this. So instead, I'm just going to try to point around and let you all start casting questions to Steve and Clay. Scott?
Obviously, you're doing a fantastic job, and especially once this documentary comes out, about informing architectural practitioners what they can ask for. And my question for you is, what is going on in the vocational masonry field that actually can inform young practitioners that they're able to actually market this kind of work?
Yeah, just last week I hired a young crew of masons that were, to my great surprise, 5th generation masons, and they were white, highly unusual, and their labor was 20. There were two laborers, 20, 23, and 25. The 23 and 25-year-olds were brothers. And it was very exciting to find these guys. They were an endangered species for me, but they're incredibly excited about it. I was down speaking at the American College of Building Arts. Steve was there, and Bernie was there. And the students were highly responsive to this. And there's, we want to start some internship programs and help be a catalyst for that education and to nurture that interest, because based on my experience at the College of Building Arts, there are a lot of people, young people, looking for purpose in different places than what they have been now. They're pursuing things that are really impressive and encouraging. So,
and let me say
how
this.
close at hand do you have to find the brick manufacturer to make it economic?
Yeah, that's. We're actually in the middle of dealing with that issue right now. We're potentially a year out on a project where we're going to need a great deal of brick, and we're considering rail and however we can maneuver with freight, gas freight. But it can be an obstacle. I would say, you know, the brick for this project came from Spring City, Tennessee, which is 300 miles away, and that was still very doable.
You're a fine artist, and you're doing some great work. How do you keep from charging more for what you're giving? It seems like you can get top dollar for this product.
Well, I have been. but you know, one of the things that I was dealing with was, you know, the Will Hill 1%. They're not going to affect any kind of real change. And if we're serious about making the world a better place, then you know, you have to contribute the best way that you can. You know, and so and another selfish motive behind that was, I want to be able to build something that I can afford, you know, so, you know, I think that there's a range there. I think that we can find a pretty comfortable range between $80 a foot and $150 a square foot, and once we get that established, yeah, then we can spread out and start doing other iterations of it.
Do you think there's any challenges in your urban context with modern building code and everybody else not really understanding what the heck's going on here?
Great question. When the facade of that porch house went up before the framing of that high Tudor house, there were several people that didn't know what to do with that.
They probably wanted to tear it down.
Yeah.
They probably wanted you to like surround it in 2x4s to make sure it would fall over, act like it was going to fall.
Yeah, you'd be surprised.
Did you check that? A foot thick wall. What? A foot thick.
We're getting ready to sign our first formal contract for the concept in the city of Decatur, so it's going to be an infill building. Fortunately, the municipality there, the building, the guys there are progressive, and I've already approached them with it and said, hey, you know, this isn't necessarily in our new energy code.
Yeah.
And his response to me, which really surprised me because this guy's a little hard ass otherwise, he said, well, it doesn't matter if it's better.
That's great.
So, you know, I didn't let him see that I was surprised. I was just like, okay.
Can you talk about the climate considerations, cold climate, warm climate?
Yeah.
What do you do?
We're working with Clemson on this house. They've got some new equipment in, and we're going to be data gathering on those, you know, as far as moisture and conductivity and all of those things. So I find that heat is going to be, a hot climate is going to be usually harder than the colder one. Just the sun, the direct sun hitting the building. But I think we can get innovative with how we handle that just by maybe taking some tapestries or something and creating canvases, something simple. We can create a retractable roof on a dome, right? So great reels. But certainly we can figure out a way to put some shade on it.
Can you elaborate on the tapestry? What do you think?
You know, I've been playing with some ideas of how you could maybe mount brackets off of the building and have canvas pulled taut and just that's parallel to like an substrate or something.
Talking interior wall?
No, on the exterior. Just on like south facing. Yes.
Can you speak to some of the experiences of the people living in these buildings and anecdotal stories about how they feel versus living in conventional construction?
Yeah, the Piersley house, that first house that I built, that's the only other structure that I've done that has been entirely structural masonry. And yeah, it's hard for them to have company over, for people engaging the building rather than engaging the but also just we looked at the energy costs for that building for a year. They were 12% under the national average, and when we built that, we weren't being incredibly energy conscious then like we are now. With the field test, we're being very, very meticulous as far as how we're sealing windows and sealing doors and sealing where one material joins to another material. Being very, very careful with that. So we're hoping for even better results, and we'll see how that goes. Yeah, they love it. They really do.